I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story and welcome to Friday. You know, it seems like every day in downtown Portland there are people in some sort of mental health crisis. This morning, for example, I saw a woman walking along a sidewalk, waving her arms, gesturing and having a grand conversation with someone who was not there. Earlier in the week, as I drove home from work, a man stared and yelled at me and other drivers as we went by. It feels like the problem is all around us. And that's why we spent the entire week looking at the mental health care system in Oregon. And by the way, Washington is very similar. Our series called Uncommitted explored the civil commitment process and why so many people with severe mental illness do not get the care they need. Many do not meet the high state standards of forced care, so they're just released. And often they live on our streets. Our series continues tonight. It's our big story. Well, you have had a lot to say on this topic all week long, and we're so thankful for your feedback. We view our show as a real conversation in real time. We read your comments and we listen to your voicemails. And tonight, we want to take a look at what you have to say about our Uncommitted series as we search for a path forward, something that could benefit all of our communities. Investigative reporter Evan Watson spent a long time working on this series. He joins us now in the studio tonight to keep the conversation going and to answer some of your questions. Evan?
Thanks, Pat. I talked with a lot of people who are intimately involved with mental health care for this story, but of course there are many more perspectives to hear. That's why it's been so great to hear from some of you. Jeff says, I worked in the mental health field in Oregon since moving here in 1972 and have witnessed the deplorable state of adult mental health in the state and in particular the civil commitment process. There was a reference made about the need to sort out the mental health and substance abuse issues to get people into appropriate care. This was an area that allowed people to fall through the cracks. Many of my colleagues and I spent a great deal of effort in advocating for dual diagnosis services for committed individuals. Much of the problem seemed to stem from the notion of funding sources needing to ensure that their dollars were not used for ineligible costs and services. The problem is readily solvable if the funders can develop a means to blend their resources to benefit all concerned. I talked with multiple people about this exact point. Some support services help people with mental illness, some focus on people with addiction, but funding might be restricted to one or the other. That overlap is missing. And of course, humanity is rarely that black and white. There's been some progress here in creating dual-purpose facilities, but just about everyone told me there's a long way to go. Then Andy asked, what happens to folks on meth and other hard drugs who are caught by police in a mental crisis? Do they just go to the hospital only to get released after they come down off the drugs? It's a tough situation, as police officers or behavioral health workers may perceive one thing, but they often want a physician to provide a medical assessment. That's why temporary mental health holds are used. The issue is if a doctor says the person's threat to themselves or others was caused by drugs, not their mental illness, that person cannot be legally held or forced into mental health treatment. They're released. Lieutenant Chris Burley talked to me about that.
It's a big ask because it's, human beings, we're very complicated and trying to figure out, how do we do that treatment? I think it's tough, but there's other places in the country that are able to accomplish that.
That's another question a few of you asked as well. Which states do this well? Of course, that depends on your opinion about where the bar should be for civil commitment, but that is something I'm looking into now for follow-up reports. Thomas says, perhaps we need strict state laws that are similar to what they used to be, with the effect of increased forced treatment. I know finding that balance would be a delicate issue, but don't we have a much deeper understanding of mental diseases today than we used to? And Marlon adds, who's responsible for developing the rules? If it's the Oregon legislature, why doesn't it change the rules to strike a better balance between the patient's civil rights and the community's safety? The Oregon State Legislature has taken brief looks at civil commitment standards over the past few years, but in both 2019 and 2021, Senate bills meant to redefine that bar died in committee. In talking about how states have moved away from using state institutions for mental health care, Elaine says, the push to empty the hospitals and turn care over to communities was well-intentioned. However, the counties and local communities gradually cut mental health treatment, funding more and more. And citizens block group homes and similar facilities in their neighborhoods. Similar to the current homeless situation, everyone wanted a solution, but not in my backyard. And many of you said our current system has become so difficult that many people end up getting mental health treatment only after they break a law and become criminally committed. Na says, Your current stories on the state's commitment process is illuminating. I felt frustrated with increasing concern that the homeless crisis is getting worse. There's talk about cost of living, drug use, mental illness, but I still didn't fully understand where and how this has come to be. Thank you for addressing these for us and breaking down the legalese for us average viewers so that we understand. Our local and state leaders need to be held accountable for the decisions they make. Obviously, the decisions that have been made have not been working. Pat.
By the way, if you missed any part of our special series called Uncommitted, the entire report is available to stream right now as a half-hour special on KGW+. That's our free Roku and Fire TV app. If you have a smart TV, you can add the app KGW+ to your list of channels. It's also online at kgw.com and on our KGW YouTube channel. Now to an issue in Portland that's being blamed for 2 recent deaths in the city, street racing. It's been a growing problem, and after another big gathering last weekend, many of you have let us know you are fed up.
And I'm calling because there's huge street racing going on 72nd and Sandy Boulevard. We have called the non-emergency and the 911, and we were told that there's really nothing that they can do about it. We're like 6 blocks away from it, and it sounds like it's in our front yard.
Yeah, frustrating. Jade wrote in to us this past weekend as well, saying, I'm wondering what's going on with all the street racing in Northeast Portland and what exactly the police are doing about it. I was treated to hours of late night, early morning engine revving and tire squealing. Please look into these issues and help us understand why PPB can't seem to get a handle on this sort of thing. And now we come into a holiday weekend where street racing could flare back up again. So what's being done to try and stop it? Well, Tim Gordon asked, but did not get much of an answer from Portland police.
The street racing spectacle, a growing public safety concern, not just in Portland, as NBC News highlighted this week.
Speed, power, and pure chaos dominating social media and America's streets.
The network report did point out Portland, where street racing has been a hard-to-stop issue for years, but getting worse during the pandemic, with empty streets, even downtown, becoming ripe for massive street racing events. Back in June, the illegal racers did donuts on the Burnside Bridge, and Portland's police chief called this a big safety concern.
During these events, people are struck by vehicles crash, pedestrians are injured. So we want to make sure we're doing everything we can from an enforcement standpoint to address it.
Enforcement is often tough because of the size of the crowds that gather. But don't tell the family of 20-year-old Cameron Taylor it can't be stopped. Taylor was a spectator last weekend at a gathering on the Marine Drive overpass of I-5. The chaotic event included gunfire. Taylor, along with 2 others, was hit by bullets. Taylor died from his injuries. That speed racing event was one of several massive gatherings last weekend around the city, including one that featured a flamethrower on Sandy Boulevard. That same weekend, 26-year-old Ashley McGill was sitting at a bus stop in the early morning waiting for a bus on Southeast Stark. Police say a street race between 2 cars caused a crash that hit and killed McGill.
It hit so hard it exploded the bench.
McGill's grieving mother, Misty, spoke to KGW before a vigil for her daughter Thursday night.
It's not fair. That just hurts the person itself. It hurts the family. Some people aren't going to get it until it happens to someone in their family. And that's not right.
Portland police have often pointed to being understaffed when answering questions about enforcement of street racing and other public safety concerns. This week, Portland's mayor said he's heard enough of that.
Let's stop talking about our inability to respond to crime in the community. Let's stop advertising to criminals that they're going to get away with it.
But for street racing, the leader of Portland's police union told NBC's Maggie Vespa the penalties for the crime aren't strong enough.
No, fines aren't enough. We need to work with federal partners to see if there's avenues to, interstate commerce type charges, things that will actually have a heavier impact.
Chief Lavelle has also talked about partnering with other agencies. We reached out to Mayor Ted Wheeler today about street racing, did not get a response from his office, but Commissioner Mingus Mapps did respond, writing a statement saying, I urge street racers to stop this activity immediately. Last weekend, at least 2 people died during these illegal events. Portland needs a break from this reckless insanity. Law enforcement will be intervening as capacity allows. And Portland police did reply, not with a plan, but with an email, and writing, due to Labor Day DUI enforcement, there will be more officers out specifically looking for poor driving behavior, and suggesting that people engaging in reckless driving may be more likely to get pulled over.
Thanks, Tim. 5 years ago tonight, a fire that started at Eagle Creek in the Columbia Gorge was growing into a monster. A 15-year-old from Vancouver with fireworks sparked the blaze. He was charged in juvenile court and his name kept secret. We checked in on the gorge and its most popular trail recently, and we found it's now green and full of life.
On a blustery Labor Day in 2017, flames given birth by fireworks in the hands of a 15-year-old inhaled the famous Columbia Gorge wind and grew exponentially. It stranded 152 hikers on the Eagle Creek Trail, some stuck overnight before being rescued. By the next morning, the fire had grown to 3,000 acres. It soon threatened the town of Cascade Locks, which evacuated. The fire continued to gain strength, and pushed by west winds, made a run through large swaths of the wilderness and sent smoke into the greater Portland area.
All this smoke and all the ash will affect our health.
The Eagle Creek fire would eventually consume 48,000 acres, force 9,000 trees to be cut down before they fell, disrupt the lives of countless people living nearby, and close the area's most popular hiking trail for 4 years. The fire burned for 3 months.
I mean, immediately after the fire, all this vegetation was gone, with the exception of the large trees that survived the fire. This would have all been black, and pretty much everything was consumed.
Chris Harper is an assistant fire management officer with the U.S. Forest Service. He also loves hiking in the Columbia Gorge.
I have a deep connection to the Columbia Gorge, and these are trails that I visit, and I recreate out here too. So certainly that was something that I was thinking about from the very beginning of this fire.
We met up with him recently to take a look at how nature has returned to Eagle Creek. The first thing you notice are the trees. Yes, some stand stiff and gray, already dead, waiting for time and gravity to pull them down. But others are flourishing in new patches of sunlight made available by the burned canopy above.
You get big trees like this that have a lot of bark, and we're tall enough to avoid a lot of the heat from the fire, and we're able to survive. And a lot of trees died, but a lot of trees were able to live through the fire.
While we were out, we met Kim Owen, who moved to Mosier just to be closer to the hiking trails of the gorge. He remembers a mix of feelings as the fire raged.
Saddening. It was a tragedy that our favorite hiking area was decimated so heavily during that fire.
Kim's with the Pacific Crest Trail Association, which helped move boulders and smaller rocks off the trail and repair heavy damage here.
Oh, this is gorgeous. This is our first time back in this particular trail since the burn, other than actually doing trail maintenance. And I'm amazed. Other than a few dead trees, you can hardly tell that there was a burn.
We also met Nadia Gray and Daniil Fashov exploring the trail with their 2 dogs. She grew up hiking here with her dad, and like so many, watched the fire grow on news feeds.
I was heartbroken. I knew that it would take a long recovery. It was something really special, and it was, whether you want to call it an accident or what, it was a piece of human ignorance, and it shows just how incredibly delicate this space is and why it needs to be treated respectfully.
5 years after the worst fire here in modern times, the ground around the Eagle Creek Trail teems with plants. Yes, you will see burned stumps and trees with black bark, reminders of a difficult time. And now, a second chance to appreciate nature.
It's so refreshing to be out here now, and I think people have learned that you can't take it for granted. Everyone's a little bit more polite on the trail. Everyone's giving each other a little bit more space. I'm seeing less damage to the trail. People aren't picking as much. People aren't littering as much. And I'm so glad that it's back.
Many are glad, including Chris Harper from the Forest Service.
The fire wasn't an endpoint. It's not something that destroyed the gorge or anything like that. It changed it, and changed it in pretty significant ways. But, the gorge is still here, and, the vegetation will grow back. And there's still lots of beautiful things to see here. So, it was a big impact, and it changed a lot of stuff, but, it didn't destroy anything necessarily.
Up next on The Story, we're heading to Cowlitz County to find out what's in a name in Longview.
There was a community in eastern Washington called Longview, has two words, Longview. And it was a very small, kind of just a stop along the railroad line.
It wasn't the first Longview in Washington, and it took some negotiation and an odd deal to get it settled. We'll explain right after the break.
Longview, Washington is the largest city in Cowlitz County, but just over 100 years ago, it was nothing more than a swampy farmland called Monticello. That is until one man saw the heavily timbered area as an opportunity for riches and a new name. For the history behind it all, we turn to Devin Haskins.
Along the Columbia River overlooked by Mount St. Helens sits a timber-ridge city known as Longview. But well before the squirrel bridges crossed the street,
The area where Longview currently is was mostly swampland, farmland.
first known as Monticello, it would eventually take on the name of Missouri businessman Robert Alexander Long, or R.A. Long. And if you've ever heard the saying, money doesn't grow on trees, well, R.A. Long thought otherwise. To the 68-year-old timber tycoon, the trees were money. With the timber supply running low, he moved his company, the Long Bell Lumber Company, to Cowlitz County. But Longview wasn't exactly populated because, again, it was
Mostly swampland, farmland.
His team of engineers fixed that issue by building dikes to stop the land from flooding. A lumber mill, supposed to be the largest in the world, was built, which would employ thousands of workers. But those workers needed a place to live and a city to live in. What's different about Longview? R.A. Long and his team planned the city.
They basically had the map set up of here's what this community is going to look like. Here's where the workers' housing will be located. Here's where the executives' housing will be located.
The new city needed a name. Longview seemed like a good fit. After all, that was the name of his house back home in Missouri.
So there was a little bit of a hitch.
How big of a hitch?
There was a community in eastern Washington called Longview, has two words, Longview. And it was a very small, kind of just a stop along the railroad line.
In fact, here's the original post office application for the Longview in eastern Washington. The railroad didn't want two stops named Longview, so Long tried to buy the name. The asking price?
A covered platform so that the mail coming off the railway cars wouldn't get rained on, and that cost about $25.
1923 was the beginning of Longview, and a year later, the city was complete. Well, some of it. It went from swampy farmland to looking more like a city with a few streets laid out.
It's a very empty city. It's like a blank slate in many ways.
And at the time the city was built, it was actually built with private money, Long's money. Among the buildings still standing today that he donated are the Monticello Hotel and the City Library. So if you ever find yourself in R.A. Long's planned city, now you know that's what's in a name.
I love those stories. So much to learn. Still ahead tonight on The Story, Portland loves nature and animals, and some homeowners are making sure their cats have access to the outdoors while also keeping them safe. Stephen Redland tells us more about catios right after the break. At the top of tonight's show, I told you we're kind of a different show here, a news program. We like to have a real interactive dialogue, sometimes in real time. And so we've been watching your emails as they've come in and your phone calls tonight. I wanted to read one that came in from Mike. He says about street racing. A lot of you have been talking to us about street racing. Mike says, at a minimum, forfeiture of vehicles used in street racing should be set in law by the legislature. Fines and tow storage fees as well. So I know that a lot of you are very concerned about this. Keep sending us your emails and your suggestions. We really do listen to the voicemails and we really do read all of the emails. At the end of yesterday's show, I promised some not so depressing news for today. We're keeping that promise. We know that Portland likes to keep it a little weird, but did you know the city claims the title of catio capital? There are hundreds of fancy patios designed just for cats in the city. Lots of people have them, including my neighbors, Leanne and Jacqueline. And you can tour some of the most creative that are coming up on September 10th. Our Stephen Redland got a preview.
Yeah. Come on in.
Welcome to Nora Austin's place. She's a self-taught builder.
Kitties, come through that door from the kitchen.
She's done all this work to her house in Northeast Portland with one thing in mind.
Goes up through that hole, and then the cat door is punched through the wall up there, and that's how they get into the sky bridge.
Nora has created the penthouse run and romp catio for her cats, complete with a live growing roof. And with mood-setting features, all the animals share the same outdoor space.
And these guys get to just lounge all over the place. And it's a really nice way to enjoy the space together.
The penthouse keeps Herb and Peaches safely inside.
It's important to have water sources for all the things.
You never know when there might be a surprise visitor.
There you go.
The penthouse is one of 10 that are part of the 10th annual Catio Tour. Portland is proud to call itself the reigning catio capital. There are over 900 across the metro area.
We really value our pets. We really value our wildlife in our yards, in our neighborhoods, in our natural areas. And so catios are just a great way to address both of those issues.
Conservation Director Bob Salinger with the Portland Audubon Society is all about birds. As a partner with the Feral Cat Coalition of Oregon, it might seem strange to be involved with the Catio Tour.
We both desire to see fewer free-roaming cats on the landscape.
Portland loves animals, and Portland loves the environment, so it makes sense we're all coming together to really make it a safer place for both.
With the Audubon Society, the Cat Safe at Home program keeps all animals healthier. The Catio Tour is a fundraiser to do that.
Hi, Esther.
Another stop on the Catio Tour features Esther Ruth, Eleanor Francis, and Ina Marie. This is the Dharma domicile.
We cut out the window, cut into the house, and then created a door.
A place where they can come and go outdoors. Ina wants people to see this perfect place she's built for her cats.
I hope people just feel the real immense love and acceptance in this space.
Gotta keep you safe. Right, girl?
The tour is popular, drawing as many as 1,400 visitors in the past. Registration is required. Besides the in-person catio tour, there's also online videos and a special VIP package.
When the cats are happy, I'm happy.
On my own catio tour, I'm Stephen Redlin, KGW News.
I love it. All right, keep sending your questions and comments to thestory@kgw.com. We're going to wrap things up right after this. Well, that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a great weekend. I'm going for a long run tomorrow. I hope you get outside too. And remember, the story, our story, that never